One of the things that I love about college football is the innovation that's required because not everybody's playing on a similar playing field. It's never even. There's always going to be differences and advantages, no matter what the topic might be. I've used this analogy before, but do you remember back in the early 2000s when Purdue was slinging the ball all over the yard? Drew Brees was throwing the ball 50, 60 times a game because that's what Purdue needed to do to have a chance to win, because everybody else in the Big Ten is going to line up in the I formation and bludgeon you to death. Purdue was never going to be able to beat the Ohio States, Michigans, Penn States, et cetera of the world in those recruiting battles. So they had to do something different. It's the same reason why Army, Navy, and Air Force run some version of the triple option offense, because they're not going to be able to just line up and play big dog football against virtually anybody else. It's why Texas Tech was throwing the ball all over the yard against the Big 12 under Mike Leach, because when you're recruiting battles against Texas, Texas A&M, Houston, SMU, Baylor, Oklahoma State, you're going to be pretty far down the pecking order unless you're doing something drastically different. And I love when people admit that they have to do something drastically different. And so I tip my cap to the Middle Tennessee State Blue Raiders. Didn't have a great 2024 in the first year under Derek Mason. And so they had to figure some things out. And you know what they've done? They've gone back to the basics in an approach to garner more NIL money, which feels weird, wrong, backwards, and indifference. But if you haven't seen this story, Middle Tennessee State doing away with alternate uniforms, alternate helmets, all of that stuff. They're going to have a helmet for the season. Home uniforms, away uniforms. That's it. No more alternates, no more cool throwbacks, no more any of that stuff. And in that savings, they say that by going to straight home and away uniforms, they get $1 million in savings, which feels like a lot. You're spending $1 million on alternate uniforms every year. $1 million is still a lot of money, by the way. It might not buy as much as it used to back in my day, but it is still a lot of money. But they're taking that $1 million and putting it into their NIL fund. They're flat out using it to entice players that way to come to their school. They're saying, hey, instead of cool alternate uniforms, drip, as the kids say, our drip might not be on fleek. Jeez. Awful. We're going to be able to give you a little bit more money than other schools that we're recruiting against because our drip may not be on fleek. Yo, I'm so uncool. But it is a great strategy because the chances, first of all, that Middle Tennessee was going to be able to use and utilize new, interesting, fun, exciting uniforms to entice recruits, it nearly as likely as putting an extra number in front of the comma in their NIL deals, because that is what matters to a lot of players today. There once was a time, and it's how Oregon, frankly, grew to become a powerhouse on the West Coast, that players cared about interesting, exciting, different, unique uniforms. It's why everybody in the sport, outside of maybe the most stodgy, stuck-in-their-way programs, have had fun, interesting, unique, alternate uniforms, because it was a recruiting advantage. Those days are gone. I've talked about eras before in the past of how there once was a uniform era where how many different uniforms you had, who had the correct uniforms, i.e. Nike and Under Armour instead of Adidas, mattered. Players were choosing their colleges on how they looked in still pictures, how they could look on Instagram, how they could look on the cover of a magazine, what they looked like, because they were wearing futuristic fabrics and colors and unconventional get-ups. That happened. And then there was the facilities era where everybody poured money into having a barbershop and a DJ booth in their NIL, in their indoor practice facilities or their football specific buildings. And that became a huge recruiting tool. We are gone from the NIL era. We're gone. I beg your pardon. We are gone from the uniform era. We're gone from the facilities era. We are now in the NIL and transfer portal era. And so for Middle Tennessee to figure out, okay, we have to do something to be a player in the NIL space. What can we do? Where can we find that money? And how do we get it out of our budget into our players' pockets? Well, do we really need alternate uniforms? Do we really need a fourth set of pants, a third jersey, a second helmet? Do we need those things? They came to the determination that no, they don't. But what they do need is money to get their players. And so while it might be unconventional, while it required some forward thinking, some really intricate looks at their books and a way to figure out how do we become a player in this space, because that really is going to be a big key for a lot of schools. How do I get money to my players? And how do I either catch the guys falling back down from Power 4 programs to want to come to Middle Tennessee State? Or how do I keep the guys that I recruited out of high school from going to bigger, greener pastures? And the grass might not be greener, but the money sure is. How do we become a player in that space? And Middle Tennessee, to their credit, figured it out. They said, we're going to allocate this money instead of alternate uniforms. We're going to give it to the players. We're going to put it in the NIL fund, and we're going to use it to attract those top recruits that we want. Whether that works out or not, whether we look back on this in a couple of years and nobody has alternate uniforms anymore because they've prioritized that money for their players, I don't know that we're going to get to that point, because I don't know that Middle Tennessee is necessarily the perfect test subject for it. There are probably some things working against the Blue Raiders that make them not necessarily the best trial run for whether this works or not. The deck might just flat out be too stacked against them for you to see a discernible, noticeable difference. And maybe just flat out, frankly, Derek Mason might not be that great of a coach to take that extra money and turn it into something that's a tangible result that you can see the return on investment was spectacular enough for other programs to go, well, hell, get rid of our alternate uniforms and get that money in those players' pockets. I don't know that we're going to see that. But I do appreciate people who, and I've said this before on the podcast, and I'll say it again because it is as true to me as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. I have such an appreciation for people who can look at a problem, recognize that it's a problem, and say, we can't just do what everybody else does here. We have to figure out something different. Part of being in the group of five is doing more with less. And I think, and the gap is only going to widen. That gulf between the haves and the have-nots is only going to get bigger. But the expectation is still going to be that those group of five schools are still playing, at least for now, on the same level as the Alabamas and Notre Dames, Texas, Ohio States of the world. So you have to figure out how you can mildly compete in that space. And I think Middle Tennessee is doing everything they can to try to figure out how they can compete in that space. So I give them a ton of credit for looking at the problem, finding an unconventional solution, and being able to reallocate all that money to go, all right, this is how we got to figure this out. And they did it. Now let's see if it works or not. That's what I'm looking forward to watching. Want to know your thoughts in the comments below? Would you like to see your favorite team ditch their alternate uniforms and use it for NIL money? Or do you like the alternate uniforms enough that your school can get that money from wherever the hell else, but I want to see different, interesting, fun, exciting, unique uniforms? I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. I appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.